Of all the games I've played on my Nintendo Switch, there's been one series that's consistently been amazing thanks to its deep storytelling, amazing characters, and vast, expansive worlds. Looking at the gameplay on screen, and the title of the video, it's not hard to miss what I'm talking about. Nintendo's acquisition of Monolith Soft way back in 2007 resulted in Nintendo not only gaining a large amount of skilled developers who would go on to assist with plenty of Nintendo's projects, but it also gave rise to the birth of a brand new RPG, Xenoblade Chronicles, for the GameCube in 2010. Years later, we'd see follow-up games with Xenoblade X, Xenoblade 2, and 3, officially solidifying the IP as a continuing series. This is all common knowledge though, I'm not going to spend this whole video explaining the history behind these games. Instead, because I've been on a massive Xenoblade fixation over the past few weeks, I'm going to talk about why I love these games and why they've become one of, if not my favorite game series ever. I gotta say though, if you haven't played these games yet, this video will spoil things from all three of them, so I recommend clicking off now if you want to experience these stories, which you really should. Each title is unique in the way that they feel, but they all feature those core aspects of what to me makes a Xenoblade game. They've all got that real-time MMO-like combat system which you'll either love or hate, great characters, absolutely god-tier music, and stories that are technically standalone, but are all connected in the grand scheme of things. Not to mention the overarching universe-transcending story that these games do tell, mainly that of what fans have dubbed the Klaus Saga, is only a small piece of the puzzle when it comes to the greater Xeno franchise. It's hard not to be impressed with how interconnected these games are. As a matter of fact, the one word that can describe Xenoblade Chronicles as a series is ambition. Look at the system that these games thrive on, the Wii, the Wii U, and the Switch. What do they all have in common? They're the weakest consoles released in their respective generations, yet these developers are able to craft a series of gorgeous landscapes filled with content that can easily last up to 100 hours. Thanks to that, these worlds truly feel alive. There's the world of the Bionis in Xenoblade 1, Allrest in Xenoblade 2, and Ionios in Xenoblade 3. If I had to pick my favorite out of the three, I'm gonna have to go with Allrest, as it's entirely populated by massive titans with wildly different landscapes, with all of them swimming in a cloud sea, with massive towns on just about every one of them. At the beginning of Xenoblade 2, you're smack dead in the face with Gormotti as this massive playable field, and it really sets the tone for what to expect further in the game. As the plot progresses, you're treated to what I can only describe as visual feasts, with different titans acting like wildly different biomes with their own feel. Tantal is one of my favorites because of the music alone, but in terms of visuals, I think the Kingdom of Uraya, More Ardain, or the Leftherian Archipelago are some of the best. The world of the Bionis in Xenoblade 1 is also great for some of the same reasons that Allrest is. That sense of scope is immediately noticeable when you reach Goward Plain. I loved how there was both the Bionis and the Mechonis as well, two worlds that contrast each other with different types of inhabitants. You start off your adventure on the Bionis and make your way to the Mechonis later on in the story, where you meet what are essentially machine-based humanoid beings. And of course, the same goes for Ionios, which combine the worlds of Xenoblade 1 and 2 together. Difference with that world is that the landscapes, while beautiful as well, are filled with this sense of deadness, which I think is pretty fitting. It is a war-torn world with soldiers' husks lying about everywhere, and it's your job as the Offseer to send them off. It's a world that might not be the most interesting of the three, but it works really well for the tone of the story, which is very thought-provoking. It touches on ideas like knowing when your time is up, what you leave behind for others, and just making the most of the time that you have. I don't know, I just felt that the game hit extremely hard and had some really incredible moments, whether it's the heartbreaking Chapter 5 homecoming scene, or those moments that specifically showcase the interactions between the characters. Its story really resonated with me in a way that the other Xenoblade games haven't. It's why, despite it falling short in some areas, it's become my favorite of the series. I love how we originally were laser focused on the war between the two nations, as well as Mio's struggle with coming to terms with her mortality, only for the scope of the story to expand to the point where that war was just a small piece of the puzzle. Learning that the Noah we were introduced to in the beginning was just one of many incarnations of him. What we thought was the beginning of our journey was actually the end of a long cycle of death and rebirth. It was an amazing setup and was awesome to watch it all unfold. When it comes to Xenoblade 2, it's hard to argue that it doesn't have great characters and a great story. What started as this quest to reach Elysium ended up being a lot more interesting than expected. Traveling these massive titans, facing off against the members of Torna, and learning about the repercussions of the Aegis War that took place 500 years before the main story was really cool. The story shares a bit of similarity with Xenoblade 3 in that respect, as you're thrown into this adventure, but as you learn more about the story, it becomes apparent that, again, the beginning of your journey is actually the tail end of a massive conflict. During this conflict, you get to know a fantastic group of characters who are very well written and just awesome to see develop. Nia, for example, briefly worked with the Torna organization in the beginning of the story, who would directly later oppose Rex and his group. Fast forward a few chapters and we get this deep backstory about her past regarding her sister, and you just kind of start to understand her. And for years, Xenoblade 2 sat so close to my #1 spot in my favorite games of all time list because of everything it had to offer. Xenoblade 1's story was another standout when it came to RPGs as well, thanks to its approach where it starts off as a basic revenge story, but switches gears pretty quickly and throws in these massive revelations that explain why the world is the way that it is, as well as why Shulk has these visions in the first place. It's a fantastic story and a standout when it comes to RPGs in general. I'm gonna be honest, when it comes to the characters, I like Shulk, Fiora, Ryan, and Melia the most, but I do appreciate all of them. Reuniting Shulk and Fiora and seeing how the story concluded was my main motivation to complete the game, despite its combat system. You see, during my first playthrough of Xenoblade Definitive Edition, I didn't exactly fall in love with its combat. I've mentioned it before, but coming off Xenoblade 2 with its auto attack cancelling to help fill up your skills faster, as well as the massive amount of blade weapons you could equip, which added more variety, I found Xenoblade 1 sort of hard to get used to. Auto attacking was slower, chain attacks were different, and there were less ways to stay healed. In Xenoblade 2, not only did certain skills drop potions, but there were more skills dedicated to healing outright. Also, the vision mechanic. This was something that I think was really cool because it tied directly into the main story, and in the beginning of the game, it was really cool to be able to see attacks coming from the future and then take measures to keep that from happening. However, if you're fighting an enemy that dishes out a lot of heavy hitting attacks, you're constantly interrupted by those visions, which may have been a fault of my own considering I was under leveled at points, but it didn't make it any less frustrating. That being said, after really getting into it and learning the combat with Future Connected, I finally warmed up to it. Because it focused on less playable characters, I didn't feel the need to experiment with different characters as much, meaning I had a lot more time to focus on the few I wanted to play as. Turns out, Melia is actually a really good character. I spent more time playing as her than I did Shulk with Future Connected. I think between the two, I still enjoyed Xenoblade 2's combat a bit more, though if we're talking overall, Xenoblade 3 has the best battle system. I feel as if it's the perfect evolution. Not only does it use skills that both fill over time as well as skills that charge by auto attacking, but the addition of the attacker, defender, and healer role just makes so much more sense. This, along with the wealth of classes at your disposal, ensures that you have a near endless amount of ways to customize your setup. I also like that each class has its own outfit. This time around, there are just no overly complicated mechanics, and battles are decently straightforward. Obviously, learning this system will allow you to take advantage of the mechanics a bit, but I didn't feel like there was too much going on like Xenoblade 2, which I felt was extremely overwhelming at first. The chain attacks also, being turned into what is essentially a minigame within the game itself, was really cool. This is probably the only somewhat complicated part of the system, but only if you wanted to maximize your damage output. Otherwise, you're just free to go crazy and watch these awesome cinematic attacks. Without a doubt, the biggest change to the battle system is the addition of the Ouroboros power, which allows the characters to pair up and transform into these massive powerful beings that deal massive damage. It's probably the biggest new mechanic in the game and also relates to the story. As a matter of fact, the main reason why they're thrown into this quest and are able to transform in the first place is because of what happens at the beginning of the game. I won't talk too much about it, but this new power, along with the addition of being able to swap characters mid-battle and a dash maneuver that allows you to quickly move around and take advantage of position-based skills, makes Xenoblade 3's combat stand out to me as the most fun in the series by far. The Xenoblade Chronicles series has a massive library of tracks. Whether it's the desperate heart-racing battle music or the more relaxed environmental themes, there's something that even if you hate these games, you'll end up loving. Of course, with the one that started it all, Xenoblade 1 is filled with great tracks. Gaur Plain, Tephra Cave, Colony 9, Engage the Enemy, Zanza the Divine, the list goes on. Something that I really loved is how varied the music can be. In the same way that the Bionis and the Mechonis differ visually, they also sound different, at least when it comes to field themes. Mechonis Field carries with it a very technological, computer-like vibe, while songs like Colony 9 sound more organic as it was made by human instruments. I've said it before, but Xenoblade 2 has some of the greatest music tracks in the entire genre. Being smacked in the face with its soundtrack was definitely one of my favorite parts of the experience, whether it's Mor Ardane's triumphant and heroic sound, or the tranquil theme of Alva Cavendish at night. I think Xenoblade 2 has my favorite music at this point. Here are just a couple of songs that stand out to me. Xenoblade 3's soundtrack was somewhat criticized by fans for having a minimalistic approach to its music compared to Xenoblade 1 and 2, and while that may be true, there are some absolute gems to be heard if you take a moment to listen while exploring. I think that it adds to the feel of the world, but also has its fair share of those familiar bombastic compositions. It also puts a ton of emphasis on the flute as one of the main instruments. Not only does it give the game's soundtrack a very strong identity, but it ties directly into the world building, as well as the relationship between the main characters, Noah and Mio. If I haven't driven home the point yet, Xenoblade Chronicles is an impossibly good series of games that, in my mind, stand out compared to the rest of Nintendo's series and in RPGs in general. There just aren't a lot of games out there like this. Xenoblade has seemingly high production value evident by the aforementioned massive populated worlds, as well as these beautifully directed cutscenes. Sometimes it feels like something out of a movie and you can tell that a lot of love went into them. It's just a very quality series that doesn't seem to ever miss, while also offering a unique experience, and for that, I gotta hand it to Monolith Soft. They're one of the greatest to do it. But with that, I think I've said enough. Xenoblade Chronicles is an incredible series, and I highly recommend it to anyone who's a fan of RPGs, and if you watch this video and this is your introduction to Xenoblade, if you don't mind the spoilers, I still think you should check the games out. I try not to go too deep into everything. There's still a lot of stuff to discover that I haven't talked about on this video, so if you haven't played it and you are interested based on what I said, definitely check it out. I don't think you're going to regret it. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, leave a like. If not, leave a dislike. And if you want more videos from my channel talking about a plethora of games from both PlayStation and Nintendo consoles, hit that subscribe button. More videos coming soon. Thank you so much for watching. See you guys in the next video.